Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Thomas J. Bellezza, and welcome to another episode of the Right Mindset Podcast, where we talk to authors about their writing process, the industry they're used to, and of course, we just talking just about the industry and writing and how fun it is and how it's always different for all of us. And today I have a very special guest, Dr. Lisa. How's it going today? Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Hi, my name is Dr. Lisa, and it's so exciting to be on the mindset, the right mindset. I have been in psychology as a psychologist for many, many years and decided I need to write books because not everybody can afford to come in and have a session. And so that's how I began my whole writing career. And that brings me to right now.
Oh, that's wonderful. And, you have a pretty good career going for you. You've been doing this for quite some time. You have 6 books, and writing is a part of who you are. It's not just something you do on the side. So why don't you tell what got you into writing? Was it that you studied psychology and you did what you did for so long, and you're like, I think I could put this into words to help people who can't necessarily afford to come to these sessions? Basically what you said at the intro, is that did that start organically, or was that a conscious decision?
Well, actually, it goes way back to 1998. I was sitting in the hospital. My mother was in critical care. She had had a massive stroke. And I have my feet up on the bed, and I'm listening to her oxygen machine kind of going, psh, psh. And I knew why she was there. She was very young. She was only in her 60s. And I said, I'm going to do something about this, not only for myself, but for my mom. And I'm going to write books and teach people how to live their best life. And that's how it began.
And the first book you wrote, I believe, was Release Your Obsession with Your Phone. Was that the first one?
No,
Right.
That's okay. That was actually my last book. My very first book was Release Your Obsession with Food. And the reason, and Heal from the Inside Out. And I wrote that book kind of partially while I was in my PhD program, writing my dissertation, because I knew there were a lot of food addicts out there. There were a lot of people with depression and trouble struggling with what they ate. And there I was, sitting in my mother's hospital room. And I said, I don't want that to happen to anybody. And maybe I could do something not only for me, but for others. And so that's when I started writing about food addiction. And every book that followed really has to do with being your best self. Right after that book, I wrote a book on how to release your obsession with diet chatter, because people have a lot of woo-hoo going in their head, and it's a big deal. And then after that one, I said, hey, let me write about cheat days, because everybody's believing in cheat days. Well, they don't exist, and they put you in a really bad space. And then after that, I thought, well, wow, that all connects to aging. I'm getting older, and everybody's scared to age. So I wrote a book on aging, and then I wrote a book on money, which, I had a blast with that one, because as you know, money is a really interesting topic, and a lot of people don't understand money. They think, if I'm a millionaire, I can have the world by the tail. Yeah. It doesn't work like that. So I wrote that book. And then the last one, which really encompasses all of it, is Release Your Obsession with Your Phone, because we're all obsessed with it.
Now, did the money book change your position on puns? No, all right. So money, change, change in your pocket. Puns. Oh, all right. Well, that's great that you kept with the obsession idea, and that's one thing a lot of authors sometimes forget about, is like, if you're going to write books, especially nonfiction, you want to keep with a motif. You want people to go, oh, this is the obsession, like the Chicken Soup for the Soul books.
Yes.
And it's good to market and brand yourself with something consistent, even though your subjects are, I would say, drastically different from one another, but the purpose of them is the same, which is taking back control, I would say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And they actually do, every single one ties together, because people with eating disorders and body image all, not all, but most of them do worry about aging. And a lot of them spend a lot of money to look a certain way to
Yeah.
stay young. And so they do tie together. And then you bring in the phone. Oh my goodness. Everybody's trying to keep up with somebody else. This person looks happier than what I am.
Yeah.
So whatever they're doing, I must be doing. So they do tie together, every single one. And, we all should be living our best life.
Now, does the you know how like some people could read the books on their phones now because they have the apps? Do you have a warning at the beginning of the release your obsession with your phone where it says, "Do not read this from your phone. Pick up a Kindle"? No.
I don't. I should. No, I don't. You're funny.
So when you were working on your first book, and I love that the journey began with food because we all need food. It's the substance of life, right?
Mhm.
What was one thing that you feel you learned, like you really learned, that changed your perception of food while you were doing the research on that book?
Well, truth be told, I was suffering from an eating disorder
Okay.
and started at the age of 12. And I didn't really know what it was. I thought I had to find the best diet. And I didn't understand that I actually had a food addiction.
Oh.
And then I began to research it like crazy to understand how many people out there chasing diets and they really have a food sensitivity. So that's really where it all began as far as my research went, because you can't beat the eating part of this if
Hmm.
you don't understand why you're eating in the first place. Not that everybody has a food addiction, but I think a lot of people do. And you look at our food today, it's very processed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing is real. And, people think, oh, I had, some chips and cheese and that's good. No, no, that's not. Cheese is fine. Everything is fine in moderation. But if you have an addiction, and that is what my degree is in, addictions, eating disorders and addictions. So all the books kind of follow that, and phone addiction, age addiction, money addiction,
Yeah.
it all kind of goes there.
And not to linger on the food, but just as a curiosity,
Mm.
like would you say that like the issue with food, a small issue with food, is that sometimes when we eat foods that are processed or aren't filling and don't have really good minerals and vitamins in and stuff like that, we don't feel fulfilled afterwards. Our bodies still crave more food to kind of, we may be filling our bodies up, but we're not really doing anything with the food. I guess would that be called like 0 calories or like what do you call that? The empty calories, where it's like you're just eating but nothing is happening with the substance you're eating. Is that an issue with food
Uh,
addiction?
yeah, absolutely. Because the brain is not triggering, hey, I've got some nutrition. I'm done. I'm full. It's almost indicating that it's still hungry. It's like you've just eaten cardboard. It doesn't recognize, it doesn't say, ding, 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 you just fed me. And then that leads to anxiety, depression, mood swings. A lot of people come in thinking they have bipolar disorder and they don't. They have a mood swing and up and a down from the foods that they're eating. I think of food really like medicine.
Hmm.
What you put in is going to make a difference in how you think and how you feel. It's really huge. And it used to be a big thing back in the day. People would talk about these food sensitivities. Now in the diet worlds or the treatment centers, it's about intuitive eating. It's about, fasting. No, that's going to take you right back to square one.
Yeah. And someone like myself, I was a massive a gym person, and I had to eat certain diets to maintain growth and maintain, and it's different than just eating to like live, like, oh, you need your X amount of calories, but like when you're working out, you got to overeat sometimes, but you have to do it right, or
Yes.
you're not building muscle, you're just building, weight. Um, the one thing I learned is that what doesn't work about diets is that everyone's so different biologically, and their inner system processes food differently, that to look at somebody and go, oh, how did you get big like that, with your, and they'll tell you, oh, I did this diet, I used these proteins, and that might not necessarily work with you. So as a question to you, for someone who's listening, what is the first thing someone should do if they are interested in a diet? Not necessarily to work out and bulk up, but just that they say to themselves, I want to make a change to my eating habits. Other than buying your book, which you should do, what is the first thing they should actually do to figure out what would work for them?
I think the first step is to figure out, are you a person that eats a little too much and so you picked up some weight, or you're a little bit underweight and you just need to have some basic understanding of good nutrition? That's one end of it. If you are suffering from an eating disorder, that's a whole other ballgame. If someone came to me and they said, I just want to feel better, just a basic understanding of foods and how to feel better, then I would cover for sure, how do you eat nutritionally sound? And I would teach, what is quality food? I always say, if it comes out of the ground and it swims in the sea, flies in the air, comes off a tree, it's probably pretty good. If it's sitting in a box somewhere and you got to open it, it's probably not very nutritionally sound. And that's what we're looking for, eating nutritionally sound. I think all beings, including our little animals, which aren't beings, they need to eat nutritionally sound. I have a parrot who eats all fresh food. People are shocked. They go, how could your parrot eat fresh food? I said, because if I give him seed, it's like giving him Twinkies.
Yeah.
He doesn't understand what's nutritional. That bird would love to eat nothing but seed. If he had his way, he'd eat only seed. If we have our way, hey, chips it is. Chips and candy bars and that kind of stuff. But that is not nutritionally sound. So we have to get to the basics.
All right. So what you're saying is, because like if it flies or it swims, or so I should throw my pizza up in the air as much as possible before I eat it, so I could identify it as a flying food to justify. I'm a Sicilian, so
Yeah.
it's part of my cheese sauce bread. I'm doomed.
No, I get it. I'm a Northern Italian girl, so I get it. I understand.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. You want to eat more like a Mediterranean style of eating.
Oh, yeah.
Pizza is fine. If you don't have a food sensitivity, have the pizza. But I would add a lot of vegetables to it so that you're getting nutrition. That's the whole point. Pizza's fine.
Yeah, some broccoli, you got to never pineapple though. So it's a big debate. And I agree with you with animals. My dog, when I first got him as a puppy, 3 months old, when I was feeding him a kibble, because that's how I grew up thinking it was kibble, he didn't process it well and he wasn't doing well. And I changed him to a raw diet, and he's going to be 9 in a couple weeks. And I bring him to vets or people see him and they can't believe he's that old, because his fur still looks good. He's still kind of healthy. And for a large breed dog, he should be dealing with a lot more physical issues and a lot more health issues. And the first vet I ever brought him to was like, I don't really know about raw food. That might be dangerous. Like, he's like, right. And then he told me the dog potentially will die within 6 years, traditionally for that kind of dog. And then I brought him back and he's like, your dog is far healthier than the percentage of. And I was like, well, the raw diet, it changes the way the animal reacts to it.
Yeah. Yeah. If your dog is loose in the woods, do you think your dog is eating kibble?
I mean,
No.
imagine.
No, he's going to go for the fresh foods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like truffles.
Yeah.
Which is true. Some dogs, they're truffle diggers. Let me ask you a question. Since a lot of your books they're all nonfiction, so that means there's some research involved. So I'm going to ask you a question I have pre-written. Can you talk about the role that research plays in your writing process and any strategies you use for conducting effective research?
Yeah. Well, I would say, first off, I am writing also fiction, but in my nonfiction, I do research, but I tell a lot of stories. I have a lot of examples to give of real people who've had real experiences. I like all my books to be very readable. I don't want it to be all research, because that sounds like we're all going to school to study something. So I try to deliver my messages in very bite-sized, easy, simple explanations. Do I do some research? Yeah, I do. But I have studied this, and it's like all here.
Yeah.
And so I really bring it out that way, unless it's something important I have to bring to it. But I don't want it to look and read like an academic book, because I think that would be so dry, so boring. And they're not diet books. This is a way of life. This is a lifestyle, inside and outside. I'm really big about healing the inside so that we can heal the outside.
And since you're a psychologist, right? A psychologist,
Yeah. Mhm.
the books have a mental element to them where it's about changing your habits, right? Because
Yes.
again, it's releasing your obsession with. Um, speaking of your fiction books that you brought that up, do you have a research process for that for your research for your fiction books, or is that more of like you just kind of off your shoulder?
Great question. And I'm very new at it. So I'm kind of stumbling along. I'm writing a historical fiction that is based on my great, great, great grandmother and grandfather's life in the 1800s.
Oh,
It's
nice.
partially true. They opened a newspaper and they were big, big time newspaper people in a little town in Wisconsin. So I'm having a blast. And I did have to research that as well. But I love that I can be very free as opposed to my nonfiction books. Those need to be accurate.
Yeah.
But with fiction, I can kind of daydream, and I want to bring those same, not eating issues, but the same themes in on living quality life and being your best self, and something positive. There's so much negative in the world. I want to bring positive everywhere I go.
Yeah, and Dr. Lisa, what's nice is that the historical fiction is you get to play with what we know as quote unquote fact, and then kind of mess around with it. Deanna Raybourn is an author who's very successful with those historical fictions. She has a slight mystical element to her historical fictions and stuff like that. But I always thought it was interesting to take the foundation of what we know and they'd be like, how do I play with it? And since it has a close relationship to your family,
Yeah.
what was it that made you decide to make it historical fiction to use your family history?
Well, I love writing. I love news. I love changes that happen in life. And this is during that time when Civil War, and not that it's focused on the Civil War by any means, but lots of changes were happening in America. And so that's what kind of drew me to it. And the thought that my grandfather decides at 15, I'm quitting school. I don't need school. I'm smart. I'm going to
Yeah,
just go and become, this big newspaper person. And he really was very, in that time, they were very successful, elite people. And it's interesting. This is from my mother's side, which is all English.
yeah.
Half of me is Italian, half of me is English. And so this is that whole English side, a little bit more, I don't want to say snobby, but a little more, polished. My
Yeah.
dad's side, the Italian, was a little more rugged.
They like the food and the English like the writing. I know how it
Yes,
is.
you got it. You
Again,
got it.
I'm Sicilian. It's all
Yes.
fish and wines and bringing family together.
Yes.
Uh, did you discover anything in your research of your family history before you really tackled this book that made you go, "Wow, that almost changes the way I look at my existence"?
Yeah, I did. I realized that my grandmother, that I focus on, her name was Abby, and I focused on her. I made her sort of the
Pro-
big person.
Protagonists.
Yeah. And she had a hard start, where her mother dies and she gets shipped off to another state, from a little rural area to the big city, and very elite people, fancy house, the maids and all that jazz, from being in the wilderness in Wisconsin. So she had a lot of things to overcome, became very I guess studious,
Mhm.
and changed so that she could be proper, and then finds her way back to Wisconsin. So it's kind of cool. And these two keep crossing
Yeah.
paths without realizing they're going to end up getting married. So it's a bit of a love story too.
Oh, that's nice. That's really
Yeah.
nice. Um, Now, since you're a doctor of psychology, right?
Mhm.
And I've read books on this. That's why I'm kind of interested in asking you and stuff like that. And because you did your research on your grandparents, You ever notice, like, sometimes someone's like, you have the same personality as my grandfather, which would be your great grandfather, which you never met, or so and so. Is there a reason that, psychologically speaking, we end up having a similar personality to family members from our historical background that we never met?
I think so. I think that it passes down. I would say that this grandmother I was very similar to in
Hmm.
a lot of ways, no matter how, because I didn't have like an easy time sometimes in
Yeah.
my younger life. And I kept pushing through. And I think I got that from her. I think that the love of words, the love of writing, the love of putting things, information together definitely came from my grandmother and my grandfather. And yeah, I think I'm an extension of her. I do.
And
Definitely.
that's a really nice quality to have as a writer, is that we attach ourselves to these wonderful histories that we discover, including the ones that are personal to us, like our family members.
Yes.
And was it a conscious decision to write this story as sort of like, a love letter to keep the memory of that history alive, or was there another catalyst that really pulled you to talk about your family, other than that? It's interesting, their struggle, but again, it's like, why did I choose my family? And what is the, because I know, like, my father, he passed, and he's a veteran, and he has all these great stories he told me, and and I incorporate a lot of his morals and stories into my fantasy books, not as
Mhm.
him as the character, but I like to keep his voice alive. Was
Yes.
was that a conscious decision?
Yeah, I think my family members have no clue that this life exists. It's not like we sit around the table and say, "Hey, let's talk about our great great grandparents." We don't,
Yeah.
unless we go to Wisconsin, we see where the grave site is, and I can see all the things that happened. But we don't. I think that it's twofold. Yeah, I want to keep her voice alive. I want her to be recognized for sure,
Hmm.
but also I think there's a message. Life can be hard and we have to keep powering through, that we can get to the other side no matter how difficult it is. We can and we will if we keep pushing forward. So yeah, I think that was really why I chose her. Who knows, I might do one with the Italians too, but I don't know, their story is so different.
Yeah.
They did go from rags to riches, but that was a whole different thing.
Of course. And I like that you're connecting the books that you wrote, the 6 books, and how it's about taking control of your life and creating habits. And when you look at just what you're saying with your grandmother, she made specific habit changes to become a part of a certain society that led her to get to one place to another place. And she was able to do that because she made conscious decisions and conscious habit changes that got her to where she had to be, including your grandfather, someone who dropped out of high school and then made a successful newspaper. That means you have to read and write. And but the habits that have to be created to be successful, you're a doctor. Being a doctor, you can't just kind of go to school and occasionally do your work and maybe study on Thursday. Like, you have to make a conscious decision. And that actually brings me back to the thought, are some of the skills that you put into those books skills that you utilize to get your doctrine, that helped you be focused and change your behaviors to study and to get through school?
Yeah, I think so. If you're asking me, did I use what I learned to get that doctorate degree while I'm writing books to sell?
Hmm.
Yeah, you have to show up every day. You have to commit to X amount of days of writing. I always kept it very simple,
Hmm.
500 words a day. Now, when I was getting my doctorate, I couldn't fool around, and we were writing papers
Yeah.
constantly, one after the other. But every paper I ever wrote, every single one, had to do with health, lifestyle, living a better life, because I knew that was the road I was taking. I knew that. And
Hmm.
so I've tailored everything to that, because I'm a real believer that we want to be our best. And in order to do that, we have to show up. We have to do something. Those books don't write themselves.
What do you
And
mean?
and like I do, people will say to you, and I don't tell that many people in a in a comfort setting. Oh, I write books. I just don't. I don't want to go there. But you and I both know people will say, oh, I always wanted to write a book. I think I'll write a book. Well, I hope you do,
Yeah.
but it's not what you think.
Yeah. It's the idea of writing a book is easy.
Yeah.
But the hardest part is to start, and the habits you have to create to start. And one of the things, me growing up, I've been in the industry for 20 plus years, the entertainment industry, and right. So, and I teach people how to be successful. That was like how I got to where I am. And the one thing I always tell them, I go, your purpose is not to do things to finish them. Your purpose is to start things and then work on them consistently, and they will finish themselves. And if you have the anxiety, like, well, I have to do this, so I'm going to spend the entire day working on it because I have to get it done, that's not organizing your time. Things are now controlling you. You're not controlling things. And that becomes this repetitive obsession, as you put it, right? And you become addicted to the need to finish things, which fuels your anxiety. And I remember having to show clients, like, it's okay to say, no, I'm going to work on this for an hour. When it's done, there's always tomorrow. And if I have an 8-hour workday of tasks, that's 8 tasks I can start and consistently work on per day. And it changes you.
Yeah.
Do you have habits like that? Do you create time blocks that you are strict to, or like, do you have a schedule, or do you do like a to-do list?
Well, I do have a to-do list. However, I do have a schedule. I work very hard in my practice. I'm extremely, extremely busy. So I get up early in the morning. I work Tuesday through Friday in my practice. I get up super early, go for a long walk along the ocean, come back clear. That's really important. And I listen to podcasts, even yours. And it's so much fun. And as I'm walking, just to clear out, then I come home, I eat a good meal. I think that's very important. And then I go off to work, and it is 10 hours back-to-back patients, nonstop. I get home about 8:30 at night, tend to what I have to tend to at home. And I will do some to-do stuff, stuff on the list. But my writing is generally after I get back from the walk and before I get ready to go to work. I just sit down and knock out my words. I shoot for 500. I'm a very fast writer. I don't know why, but I'm very, very fast. And I'll put out some of my, at least 500, if not 1,000 words. Also, sometimes when I'm walking or biking or whatever I'm doing, exercise-wise, I might get a terrific idea and I'll dictate it. And
Yeah.
then,
Oh, and that's actually a psychological thing, right? There are people that have a learning disability where if they actually exert themselves on a exercise that kind of distracts them, and they listen and think about things, they actually obtain it better, right? Is there a name for that process?
you got me there. I just know that you're at a relaxed state of mind. So your subconscious mind is taking it in and you're in movement. I always call it meditation movement because I think meditation is really important to quiet the brain. And I like to meditate and move at the same time. So I don't know what the name would be, but I clear it out and I let it in. And I come up with some pretty good ideas.
Yeah, it's always been interesting, like how the mind works and stuff like that. And one thing I learned when I was growing up, and I got this from my grandfather, and then subsequently a psychologist and stuff like that. But like when you associate an emotion with something you're learning, it becomes valued, and because your brain is constantly trying to delete unimportant information because we're absorbing so much that it's like, wait, we don't want to overload. So, and sometimes when we have an interaction, we forget it because we don't associate it with something that's emotional. So like when I was learning in school, or if I'm like researching stuff like that, I try to associate with an emotion. Like, what does this make me feel like? And I contributed to, I also have a photographic memory, but
That helps.
it definitely helped. I can't remember like because dyslexia, so I see words weird in my memories, but I can walk through the memories and stuff like that. But it's always, I can just go to the emotion I was feeling, and then it just brings back the entire experience of that. And I always thought that was intriguing psychologically. So I wanted to be a psychologist when I was younger. I was like, I just love the mind. I actually have a question about psychology. Is it true? And I'm only asking this because I have two other friends that were psychologists. They still are, and one of the things they said is like they also see a psychologist because it's basically a cleansing. Is that something that's practiced by psychologists where they go themselves to a psychologist to kind of cleanse their week?
There are many that do that. And do I? No, I don't. Maybe I should. But I feel I have such a good, healthy practice, lifestyle practice. But if I needed one, I would certainly go. And have I ever gone? Absolutely. But not since I've been practicing. I
Mm.
would say before I began to practice, I did. But yeah, I think a lot do go see someone. The one time that I did when I was just studying to become a psychologist, the girl that I saw was really intimidated. And she, at the end of the session, she goes, "Oh, I'm so uncomfortable with you. I just feel like you're studying me." And I thought, oh, there goes that idea. So I don't.
You're going to need a therapist. Have you ever found yourself in a Tony Soprano situation?
Yeah, every day.
Every day.
I could write the funniest stuff. You just would have no idea. But
Yeah.
yes, and since the pandemic, all kidding aside, addictions are up and
Mhm.
depression is through the roof. I've never, ever worked so hard as I am now.
Yeah. And speaking of depression and because of the pandemic and all those things, and you're an expert in your field, what is something a person could identify with inside that would allow them to know that maybe it's time to see a therapist to kind of work through something? What is that? What should someone look for?
I think they should look for, are you having trouble sleeping? Are you having trouble focusing? Are you raging and having like these outbursts of anger? Are you crying more than you normally would? Do little things get on your nerves? Are you maybe threatened to lose your job
Mm,
or your marriage or having conflicts with your children? These are signs something's going on, something is happening, and maybe you need to talk to somebody. And you may only need one time just
yeah.
to get it out. They sort it with you, and then off you go. But I think all the signs are there. Maybe you're eating too much. Maybe you're eating too little. Maybe you're drinking more than you normally would.
Hmm.
Maybe you're getting violent.
You
Yeah.
know, and that actually brings me to the opposite side of that. What is a good sign to know that maybe you've reached the end of your therapy and that it's okay to move on? And because I have someone that was very close to me that became, and I love therapists and I love therapy and I think it's very powerful. I'm not saying this in a negative way. I'm just saying their experience. They became how do I put it? They would have to call their therapist to make decisions, right? And the therapist was like, "We have to kind of wean you out of therapy because you're starting to use it as a crutch, as something that's big." So before someone gets to that point, what is something somebody should look inward and say, maybe I've reached just at this point in my life, I'm ready for a break from therapy.
That's a really, really personal question for each individual to
Mm,
process. I don't think there's a timeline. Somebody could be a week or 2 weeks and get what they need. Some will be chronic and need some kind of palliative care for the rest of their life.
yeah.
It depends what kind of mind you're working with. If it's somebody who's very healthy in their mind and they're working and they're very successful in what they're doing, they're probably going to instinctively kind of know.
Yeah.
But you do form a very close bond. I would say if that person is calling you a lot now with texting constantly, they're not learning to make decisions on their
Yeah.
own. And when someone asks me, "What should I do? What should I do?" I always say, "You need to look inside." And I can't tell you what to do. But if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not a good idea. If you don't know what to do, don't do anything until you are ready to make a decision. But when should somebody leave therapy? Boy, that's a real tough one.
Mm.
I've had, lots of patients come and go. They leave, they're doing great, and then something happens and they come back in. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I like that how you say that. It's definitely a personal decision. It's something that you have to really see for yourself. And sometimes we might not know it ourselves, and we'd be like, I feel like I'm ready to go. It's like, but let me just kind of maybe I'll bring it down to once a month instead of once a week or something like that. So it's always good to have that. I knew this person that was like, I think I need a new therapist, and I was like, why? And they were like, well, I keep, like you said, they'd be like, I would ask them what I should do and how I should go about it, and they always make me tell me I have to figure it out. I'm like, yeah, they're there to give you the tools to process and work through it so you can analyze, because they're not going to be there for the rest of the week. So,
Yeah.
and they were ready to leave their therapist because they were like, I think they're bad. And I was like, I think they're good. Like they're not falling into the trap of let me just tell you what to do.
Exactly. And I love how you noted that you start to scale down.
Yeah.
If you're going every week or twice a week, depending on the case, bring it to a week, bring it to every 2 weeks, bring it to every 3 weeks, bring it to a month, bring it to every 3 months, which I have done many, many times very successfully
Mm-hmm.
with different patients. And I think that's a good strategy because you give that person the opportunity to be out there and
Mm-hmm.
kind of feel it out. Can I do this? Because it's scary. You really form a very close bond with a therapist. If you're, some people don't, then they move on. But when you form that bond, that's a big deal. That's a big deal because that person being the therapist,
Yeah.
they know you. They're in your head with you, and they are experiencing with you, and not just a block of ice. At least I think a good therapist, where you're engaging in conversation.
Now with that kind of relationship growth, is there usually have you ever been, well, maybe not you, but like just in general, like do therapists or psychologists run into situations where that line between basically patient and doctor becomes so blurred they start looking at you as their friend, and they start trying to break that boundary of, hey, you want to go get dinner, or do you want to hang out, or I have a celebration coming. What is a way that someone could approach that as a therapist? But I ask for writing reasons, because when we're writing characters, sometimes we get lost in the character and we start believing that character is real. We create a psychosis for that character.
Yeah.
So this is sort of, I'm leading to that. So keep that in mind. So what does that situation feel like when they start kind of breaking that boundary down?
I think if they break that boundary down, that therapist didn't do what they needed to do. You need to not go there so you don't go there, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I never, ever, ever do anything on a personal basis with anybody, ever.
Yeah.
I just don't. Do they feel like we're buddies sometimes, or like we're really close, or like I really know them? Absolutely, and that's good. But I don't want to blur the lines. Now, do they buy my books? Yes. Is that blurring the line? I don't think so.
No, because it's still helpful. It's
Yes.
like, yeah, it's guiding. Yeah.
Yeah, they might come in and talk about it and, work with them with it. But do I, I don't want anybody knowing where I live, or, I don't.
Sure, you have a beach.
I do. I do have a beach. I don't want them to know. I mean, they will figure that out reading, my books, not where I live, because I always use my business address.
Yeah.
But I try to keep it, because it depends what's going on. I mean, I have some that were and are in the end stage of life.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I'm going to be there every step of the way.
Yeah, you'll go to the hospital if, like,
I may not go to the hospital because I don't want to get caught in with a family.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
I may not do that, but we do a lot of telehealth. They can reach me. They see me because they can't get out anymore. I definitely am in those kinds of situations. I've gone to funerals where I knew every character, every single person at that funeral. The one that comes to mind, the son was very famous,
Yeah.
very, very famous in California. And I loved his mother. And when she passed away, and I went to the funeral, which I don't usually go. I think that's 3 in many, many years.
Yeah.
But that one I went to incognito.
Yeah.
Nobody knew me from anywhere. And I looked at every single person. I was like, oh, I know what this one did. And that, oh, that's what that one did. And I really felt like I was stalking
Oh,
everyone.
yeah.
It was the weirdest feeling, but it was kind of cool. It was like I knew them and they did not know me. I
Yeah.
may write a book about that one day. That was good.
That's an interesting experience, yeah, because you're going in there. It's it's sort of like when we meet celebrities.
Yeah,
We know everything we know about them because they're exploited, and they don't even know our name.
I know.
And we're just like, "Hey, Brad Pitt," and they're like, I'm with my family and smoking weed," you know. But that is a pretty interesting story, just as on a psychological level.
Yeah,
Like, what are you going through? What are those anxieties? And just maybe even the thriller element of it is like the therapist becomes obsessed with maintaining knowledge of these people after the person passed. Wow, that's a story. That story
that
writes
is a
itself.
story. I'm telling you, we got one right there.
It's all yours. Enjoy.
Yeah, yeah. Now, to that same idea, I have had people that I didn't know from anywhere come in with a book of mine under their arm
Oh,
and sit down. And I always share me. I
yeah.
do share me in my books. I don't hold back,
Mhm.
flaws, warts, and all. And this person sat down and went, "Oh, you really could eat like that at one time? You really did that?" I just wanted to like just disappear because she really knew me and I did not know her.
Yeah, yeah.
That was uncomfortable.
The tables would turn, and it was just, yeah. That's the thing. Like in movies, with CIA agents or FBI agents, they walk and they go, "Mr. Anderson," and like you're like, "Oh, they know who I am. I don't know who they are. How much do they know about me?" It can be so uncomfortable.
Yes.
And going back to writing, like you're working on a fiction book that's based on this historical reality. But there are characters in there, I'm sure, that are made up. And how does it feel to work on a character where you know so much about them, but they're missing something? There's something they're not real. They're not real people. So how do you use your experience as a therapist, a psychologist, and someone that understands the human psyche to kind of relate to a character that's a psychosis? It's fake. It's a fake character. So how do you work through that?
Well, with the fiction, because with my nonfiction, obviously they're all real people, but I changed the names and all that. With the fiction, I have newspaper clippings.
Mm.
I have stories about them, just enough, not much, but enough to get kind of carried away. And so, do I embellish? Absolutely. I've made it into this big saga, the Gilded Age, and
Yeah.
I'm just having a blast with it. There are characters I had to make up, and I do kind of feel like they're really real,
Mm-hmm.
but I have to remind myself, no, they are not.
Yeah.
Because if a family member ever reads this thing, they're going to go, "Hey, I don't think that happened," but I don't think they are as invested as I am,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and how much I have learned about time, that time and what people were doing. And you can kind of guess what they might have been doing, as the newspaper was the big deal back then. We
Yeah.
didn't have telephones. We didn't have, what we have now. Everything was newspapers. That was a big, big deal on how to get information.
Yeah, I mean, that was the talk of the town, and you can manipulate the town through the newspaper because this is the information I needed. I've seen Deadwood. I know how it works. So through your writing journey, as you're working on this the historical fiction book, are you finding a different kind of joy in working on a fiction book versus, say, a nonfiction? Is it something that you might kind of lean towards more moving forward, or do you really appreciate the writing process for these nonfictions?
I am having so much fun writing the fiction because I'm letting loose.
Yeah.
And I'm just imagining all these things. So it's a blast. And I feel like I'm hanging out with all these characters. But with that said, there's always going to be an obsession. an obsession with a phone, obsession with, something, right? My next one's, releasing the obsession with guilt. I'm going to have a blast writing that.
Yeah.
Because I have such a resource pool from all the patients I have seen. I know what guilt looks like, and I know how to come out of that. So in answer to your question, I will be doing both.
Okay. But do you have a like I write nonfiction, but I also write thrillers, and I write epic fantasies, and I write scripts, and I write, but I have my babies. I have my, like, oh, I can't wait to get to that epic high fantasy, but doesn't mean I dislike the others per se. But do you have a preference to either or?
It's such a different feel.
Yeah.
The fiction is magical. Would I rather go run to the desk and start working on that? Yeah. I have to stop myself and say, no, let's go do some of the other. It's a little tricky separating my mind. I had to take like a little pause. Actually, I did the NaNoWriMo thing for the first time. I didn't even know what that was. And I said, oh, I'll try that. And that's really how I got that fiction book started, because I felt that pressure, because I wanted to get the 50,000. I ended up getting like 70,000 in a month. And I just completely separated from the nonfiction completely. So it is a little tricky, and I'm very new at trying to do both.
Yeah.
As far as nonfiction, that comes very easy to me. Very easy.
Yeah, and there's so much playroom in a fiction book. Like in the world of fiction, you can do anything. You could literally make. You could be like, salt shakers are magical. So there's a fake science to step. Like when we step, you can But with nonfiction, like I have self-help books, so it's like I can't make things up. like you just can't. You can't just be like, you just throw salt over your shoulder, spin around 3 times, and then be hopeful. That's not gonna happen. It's like. Speaking of, though, there was a book called The Secret. I'm sure you've heard of The Secret, right? And when it came out, a lot of my friends were like, you got to buy this book, you got to read this book. So I bought it just as as you would, and I read it, and I was like, the one thing this book was missing was to take action. It was all about just manifest it, think about it, and I was like, there's no way you can lay in bed for months going, I'm going to own that house one day, and it'll happen. Like, you have to take action too. And they retrofitted that action into the movie version of The Secret. And they were like, you have to do things. You have to take steps. But like, my friends were like, no, you could just be like, I'm going to get a good job. I'm going to get, and I was like, no, you can't, it doesn't work that way. Which brings me to marketing, your books. Like, you can't just write a book and just put it on the table and be like, well, the book is so good, it's awesome and amazing, and I it's not because I'm biased, it's that I wrote it, but it like that mentality, like the book will sell itself, so I'll just put it on Amazon, and just by putting it on Amazon, people will buy the book. And you're like, no, like, you have to become present in their realities. You have to be a part of their lexicon, like become a part of their experiences. And with someone that has 6 books like yourself, and you have a brand, and you've established your expertise, what is a bit of advice you can give to new authors to help them create the habits of actually leading to creating that presence and creating a brand and developing a relationship with the audience to sell books?
I think you have to show up.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need to be in a lot of different places, maybe on different social media platforms. I think, the whole idea of manifesting, well, we can manifest, but like you said, there has to be action behind it. If you believe that you're going to be able to write this book and get it out there, you're going to be able to write the book and get it out there, but you have to put the action forth. Mm-hmm. It's funny you brought up manifesting, because I talk about that in my money book, because people say, oh, when I get $1 million, I'm going to do this, that, and the other. And I think that doesn't work quite like that. It doesn't work like that. I wish it did. Mm-hmm. Lots of people have millions of dollars and they sit around and do nothing. Yeah. It doesn't mean that money is going to get you where you think you're going to go. You have to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
Marketing is very, very difficult. Some people hire it out. It's not my favorite part, to be honest. I'm not crazy for marketing, but I try my best to put a face out there.
Yeah. Well, like part of doing and part of creating the passions and being able to do the passions we love is we also have to accept that there's stuff we don't like doing. And those things allow us, they reward us with the gift of being able to do the passion. And one thing I used to tell my clients all the time, I go, you got to get involved in your industry, especially if you're a musician. Like, you got to get involved in your industry. And I go, how long have you been doing music for? They're like 10 years. And I like, how long have you been in the supermarket industry? They're like 10 years. And I go, are you a manager in the supermarket industry? He goes, yeah. I go, and what did you start out as? He goes, I was packing out the shelves. And I go, did you want to work in the supermarket industry? He's like, no, I wanted to be a musician. I go, why didn't you get involved? And this is what he said. He goes, honestly, I didn't want to do anything where I wasn't playing my music on stage and making money just doing my music. And I go, are you making money as a manager running your business? And he goes, no. And I go, you gave the energy you needed for a career to a business that you don't even want to be a part of. And that's the path you can still take. And he was still young. He was in his 30s, whatever. And I was like, you can take that path. Just start getting involved. And he's like, yeah, but I don't like marketing. I don't like this. I don't like that. And I go, well, how did you get to be a manager? And he goes, well, I had a friend that was in the seafood department. And then I go, oh, you networked. He goes, well, you see people. I was like, yeah, why do you see them every day? He goes, I don't know. I go, because you're involved in the supermarket industry and they're around you. And he's like, oh, it started like becoming reality to him.
Yeah, you make such a good point. My father, he's passed now, but he was a very well-known, accomplished musician. Mm-hmm. He didn't get there by becoming well-known. He had to learn and practice day after day. He played the accordion because that was big in Italy, and then the piano. And he opened for Liberace. He opened for many very famous politicians, all the dailies in Chicago, Nixon. My dad was Republican.
Yeah.
My mother was Democrat.
Well, back then they weren't as evil.
No, they weren't. They weren't as evil. And what was cool growing up, my mother Democrat, my father Republican, they would have these conversations. And so that made me purple. So I was able to understand, take what I need, leave the rest kind of thing. But to your point, he didn't go from learning the piano or the accordion to the piano and then in front of Liberace. No way. Yeah. He really worked hard. And then he had a fleet of music stores and the rest is history. But he had to work his way up, just like my grandfather, the newspaper person, worked his way up. And you're right. We have to network. We have to be visible. We have to be out there. I'm a little lucky. I have lots and lots and lots of patients that see my stuff and buy my work. So that is a little bit of help. I could be dropping off at different facilities and drop off a bunch of books, which I probably should do. That's another way to get our books out there, is drop them off somewhere. Give out copies.
Hire a PR agency. Usually they won't work with you unless you have an agent or publisher, but you could find a smaller scale PR company. And what they do is they start getting you interviews. And I always tell people, when it comes to branding and marketing, it's not about your book, because your book doesn't say anything, right? But you have a voice, you have a position. And when people start connecting with your position, they start going, oh, I'm interested. Let me check out their books, especially when you're nonfiction. And interviews are better than reviews, because reviews are the opinions of others and interviews are hearing your positions. And that's how you build relationships with people, is through conversation.
Yep. True.
But all right. So before we go, I ask everyone the same question at the end of the episode. So I'm going to ask you the question right now, and then you give us a little answer. All right. Okay. What is one piece of advice you discovered about writing, either through someone else or yourself, that completely changed the way you approach the writing process?
One piece of advice. I've read every writing craft book you could imagine, so I guess that would be one piece of advice. Read different craft books. But I think at the end of the day, it's the one thing I learned was you just have to commit to X amount of words, daily or weekends or whatever your thing is. I think it's the commitment. At least that's what I learned myself from others who walked before me.
Hmm. All right, that's excellent advice. Yeah, you got to commit to a couple of words a day, but not you shouldn't challenge yourself to others. You should challenge yourself to yourself. So just because one
Correct.
writer does 3,000 doesn't mean it doesn't make you a better or worse writer because you're not hitting their numbers. As
Right.
long as you're hitting your numbers, and that's
Mm.
important to know. So thank you for that
Yeah.
advice. And obviously, before we get going, and we thank each other. Why don't you tell the audience how they can find you, and if you have anything coming up.
Well, they can either put my name, drlisaortigaracrego.com, and they're going to pull up my website, or it's also under weightcontroltherapy.com. Those are my websites. They're the same. And of course, I'm on social media, all of the above.
All right, social media. I just found out about that. Do you know
Uh,
about Facebook?
oh,
I actually have a MySpace account. I think that's going to be the next big thing. Is
that's funny.
is my All right, Dr. Lisa, I really appreciate you coming on the show and being a part of the discussion. I loved you letting us into your world a little bit.
Thank you. And I like being with you and talking to you. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, hopefully maybe next season we could get you in on a panel and we could have an open discussion with some other authors and make something happen.
That'd be fun.
All right, let's get to our final thought for the day. Now, we talked about a lot of stuff today, but I want to focus on something that I really love about Dr. Lisa's books, and that's creating the habits to change our behavior. Because when we have an obsession to something, when we have to start creating changes in the process to develop new healthy habits. And as an author, to get your book where you need it, you have to start. And sometimes it's difficult to just start writing. So create habits that allow you to start the smaller processes. Spend 10 minutes a day thinking about your book. Maybe spend 10 minutes a day writing down ideas or bullet points. It's not about how much you can write in that time. It's about creating that habit by being consistent, because after 22 to 66 days, you'll start creating a physical mental habit to make you not only a better writer, but a consistent writer. So as you develop as an author, remember, it's about starting, not finishing, and being consistent. Well, as always, I love that you join us for these discussions and keep developing the right mindset. I'll see you next time. Bye.